There's a particular way a small betrayal tastes, not of vinegar or salt, but something thinner and sharper, like the last clean edge of a plastic fork. I didn't notice it at first. I noticed the empty Tupperware. It started in October, little enough to be dismissed. A sandwich gone here, a salad missing there. I work hybrid, 2 or 3 days in the office, the rest at home, so I assumed some lunches would get eaten eventually by fate. A misplaced tote, a forgotten cooler, a hungry intern with good intentions. What made it odd was the rhythm. Once every week or two, reliably, my lunch would vanish. Not just a snack, but the whole thing. It was happening more than chance. It was happening like a habit. Our office is small enough that people borrow pens by name and remember birthday cake preferences from 3 years ago. Small enough that when you put your lunch in the communal fridge, someone will probably notice the little embroidered napkin you wrapped around the yogurt. Because of that intimacy, the theft felt more intimate, as if the missing lunch had become a private conversation someone else was having about me at the copier. At first, I treated it like a mystery to be mildly amused by. It's easy to be amused when your boss jokes about the mystery snacker, and someone pins a cartoon of a raccoon on the notice board. I told myself not to care. I told myself I'd get used to having to pick up an extra sandwich sometimes. But annoyed became curious. Curious sharpened into irritation. Irritation cooled into the kind of low, steady attention that makes you start keeping lists. I kept track. Dates, days in the office, what I'd packed. Turkey with mustard, quinoa salad, a leftover pasta that hummed with garlic. Whenever the theft happened, I marked it. The spreadsheet-like tendency comes from my day job. Writing code and managing timelines makes me put things into columns when reality feels messy. The pattern was stubborn. The lunches disappeared on the days I was there, not the days I wasn't. That detail lit a small, stubborn flame. Someone in the building, or someone who knew my schedule, was the culprit. You'd be surprised how quickly suspicion spreads through a small office. It's like static electricity. One charge and suddenly everyone is a little more alert, a little more careful with where they leave their yogurt. I started paying attention to the fridge more than I cared to. I'd get up at midday and hover, hands folded, watching the door like a guard at a museum. I caught people opening it for soup, closing it with the caution of someone who has touched a relic. But nothing obvious happened. There was movement. There was always movement. I tried a few quiet experiments that felt like heist movie-level cunning in the calm of our kitchen. I rewired the mundane into surveillance. I put a bright pink sticky note on top of a container. Do not touch, Sarah's lunch, language chosen to carry the right mixture of humor and warning. I put my phone on the table with a ridiculous alarm set to vibrate at noon, the kind of thing that would startle anyone trying to be stealthy. I also started leaving a tiny, ridiculous object in the lunchbox, a plastic flamingo charm someone had given me at a white elephant party. Because if you're going to conduct an experiment, you might as well be theatrical about it. No one touched the flamingo the first time. The second time, my sandwich had been gone, and the tiny flamingo was missing too. It would have been funny if it hadn't felt like confirmation. The thief was precise. They were taking a whole package, not just anything that looked tempting. More than that, they were doing it on a schedule that suggested convenience or forgetfulness rather than malice. It made the mystery more personal and less random. I told a coworker in confidence. "Is this odd?" I asked. He laughed in a way that sounded guilty. "People steal lunches," he said, like a fact of nature. Maybe someone's spouse forgot to tell them what was packed. The idea lodged in my head and took root. 100 imagined scenarios sprouted like weeds. A heroic janitor with a secret lunch problem. The intern who'd never been taught boundaries. A visiting partner with a taste for my grandmother's potato salad. None of it sat right. Employee of the month banter quickly became a quiet test of my own tolerance for petty office politics. Was this a tolerable nuisance I could live with, or a line that demanded drawing? One Tuesday, I came in early. The office always looks different when you're there before the rest of the herd. The lights still have a soft, slow glow, the copiers hum a waiting hum, and everything smells faintly of cheap coffee and the lemon-scented cleaner someone uses on sticky counters. I placed my lunch in the fridge at 8:30 and then retreated to my desk, pretending to be absorbed in email. The plan was small and ridiculous: to catch the thief in the act, or at least to unsettle them with the knowledge that I was watching. At 11:30, I was folding code and thinking in that transactional way programmers do when memory and sequence line up like tidy boxes. Footsteps. A shadow at the doorway. I looked up. It was him. He moved like somebody who owned the rhythm of the place, the easy, familiar gait of someone who'd been around long enough to know where the mugs lived. He was not a dramatic figure, just average height, a little rounded at the shoulders from being in front of a desk, tie loosened, coffee cup in hand. We had met in the hall enough to know faces and not know lives. Not someone I'd suspected in my most fanciful scenarios, just a person named Mark whose laugh punctuated weekly meetings. He had my lunch in his hand. Time does something funny when you confront it. The office sounds fold down the way an orchestra softens when the conductor points. The hum of the kettle, the low click of the dishwasher, everything became background texture. He looked at me, fork halfway to his mouth, a bemused blankness on his face that made my stomach dip. If he'd been a cartoon character, a question mark would have popped above his head. "Hey," I said, voice smaller than I expected. "That's my lunch." His eyes traced to my labeled container, and then to me. There was a beat, the kind of beat when two strangers in a small place ascertain whether they are about to make a scene. He said, "This is my lunch." We did the thing people do when the world asks for proof. We looked for the evidence in the most pedestrian places. My handwriting on the lid, the little scrawl I put on all my Tupperware, was unmistakable. The flamingo charm was gone. He blinked, posture shifting from casual to something like the hollow surprise of someone who realizes he's been caught in his own confusion. For a minute we circled each other politely, each offering versions of the truth shaped by convenience. He said his wife packed his lunch and that he didn't always know exactly what was in the container. He said he had gotten an identical lunchbox as a birthday gift sometime around October. He sounded small in a way I didn't expect. He sounded like a man telling a story to rescue himself from an embarrassing place. I felt the story inside my chest change shape, from accusation to skepticism to something closer to curiosity. Of course, the first moment had been irritation. The second moment was the rare checking of facts. The third was the slow softening that happens when you realize you don't know the whole narrative. We stood there with the container between us, a little domestic artifact that had somehow been pulled into a workplace drama. People glanced over. A head turned from a monitor and then turned away as if not wanting to be the person who sees a fight between friends. There was a small, ludicrous intimacy to the moment. Two adults in a fluorescent kitchen renegotiating boundaries over cold pasta. When he explained, the details slid into place in a way that explained both the frequency and the plausibility. He'd been given a lunchbox identical to mine, same color, same brand, in October. His wife, who packed his lunches for him, made a practice of filling whatever container she had that morning with something she thought he'd like. He didn't open it before work. He took the same elevator, made the same coffee, sat at the same desk. He ate when hunger struck, and always assumed the food was what his wife intended, because she was the one who packed it. He had never recognized my handwriting, he said, because, well, he never looked. It's a strange thing to be both relieved and annoyed at once. Relief came because the theft hadn't been malicious. There wasn't someone sneaking around the building with villainy in their pockets. Annoyance came from the absurdity, from how a pair of identical Tupperware containers could cause this slow erosion of trust. We sat down and talked through it like embarrassed adults. He apologized with the kind of clumsy honesty that makes apologies feel real, not performative, just a little stunned by the fact that something so private had become public. He told me he would buy me lunch for a couple of weeks to make up for it. I told him I didn't need it, that it wasn't necessary. But he insisted, a small insistence that was both sincere and a little sheepish. He showed me the grocery receipt from that morning, a telltale little slip in his wallet that matched the time frame he'd mentioned, and the story settled into a tidy, plausible scene. Afterward, we did the boring practical things that drama usually requires: labels, notes, clarifying names on the fridge, an agreed rule that if anyone was uncertain about a container, they would check before eating. We laughed a little when I mentioned the flamingo. He said he'd never thought to consider whether lunchboxes could be cloned. The office, as a community, adjusted quickly. People like to repair small rifts. It's a survival skill in a small workplace. What surprised me was not that the affair ended. It had to, right? But how the unwrapping of motive revealed something softer. An invisible domestic choreography that led to a mistake, a habit of not asking, a preference for convenience. The man had not been intentionally malicious. He had been accommodated into a routine. That routine had been harmless until my labeled food fell into it. People are messy. Lunch theft, in a list of wrongs the world commits, feels inconsequential compared to the big harms that make headlines. Yet there is a sociology to small wrongs that teaches you about the climate of a place. If you tolerate impunity for small violations, thresholds shift. I could have used this story as a minor moral. Label everything, trust no one. Instead, I found a different moral, more tender. Ask before you take. And when you realize you've made someone uncomfortable, apologize with more than an emoji. After the encounter, he did buy me lunch for a couple of weeks. Genuinely nice sandwiches from the deli down the road. A small ritualization of the repair. It was silly and small and lovely in its way. He left a gift card on my desk once, tucked under a neat post-it. Sorry about the lunches. My bad. I put it in my drawer and felt the awkwardness of gratitude and being owed a kindness at once. We were a blip in each other's days after that. He'd sometimes come by my desk and ask a practical question about the calendar or a meeting time, apologetic but not burdened by guilt. The office dried up the gossip and replaced it with a quieter familiarity. The fridge libraries became more clearly labeled. People developed a shorthand for boundaries in their small, practical way. Write your initials, put a sticky note on top, check in if something looks off. We built little fences that kept the peace. The episode changed me more than it changed him, I think. It sharpened my sense of how much we assume about each other in the spaces we share. I learned that confrontation can be gentle, and that asking for facts is not the same as being vengeful. I learned that many mistakes are not acts of ill will, but of not looking, of convenience and habit. I learned to measure my assumptions against the soft human fact that most people, even those who make you feel slighted, are not cartoons of malice. Of course, there are other stories. In some offices, the thief would have been some performative villain. In other ones, the culprit would have been a laughable prankster with a history of petty crimes. In mine, the thief turned out to be someone who'd been given the same box as me and had been living in a different kind of routine, one where lunches were packed and eaten without conversation. It didn't excuse the inconvenience. Corner, there was an extra, cautious care. Someone had taped a bright sticker on the shelf. Ask first. It was a minor, earnest artifact of a small social repair. I smiled when I saw it, packed my lunch, and left, the little plastic flamingo peeking out like a secret between aisles.